Okay, so I think we'll get this show on the road. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on enabling Microsoft Teams as a phone solution. So as a quick introduction, my name is Adrian Sweeney, and I'm the Sales Director here at Planet IT. It's not my young face on the initial slide there, but for those of you that know me, that's quite funny. So firstly, for those of you that don't know Planet, I wanted to do a very brief introduction on who we are. So firstly, don't worry, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here on every area, but essentially I wanted to illustrate where we can help and in what areas we can help our clients with. So we have a range of IT support packages that we offer companies, both as a full outsourcing service or as a phone a friend for IT teams. We have a large team of experienced IT engineers here who can provide the specialist skills you require to deliver any size IT project. We provide a range of voice and connectivity solutions, hence the webinar today, right through to providing you with the costs on almost all IT-related hardware, software, and cloud services. Essentially, one of our key goals, as many of you will also have, is to be a great place to work, as we know, sort of having happy staff creates a great customer experience. So on to the next slide. So why are we doing today's webinar? As you can see, I think the graph will speak for itself. There's been an explosion of interest in the usage of Teams, and I think the usage of Teams speaks for itself and has become an essential part of the communications companies use today. Here at Planet, we're perfectly placed and have the in-house expertise to deliver and manage both the voice element of direct routing, and we have the IT experience to manage the Teams deployment itself. We really have seen an explosion of interest and uptake on this topic, as so many of us rely and use Teams as an integral part of our communication today. So it makes logical sense to see how you can take Teams that one step further. So, as some quick introductions of who will be running today's demo and webinar, we have Farah Nazir Chapman. So Farah has spent over 20 years as a PBX engineer and is Avaya, Samsung, Panasonic, Horizon and Wildix accredited. Hope I've got all of those for you, Farah. Her voice and connectivity department here at Planet perfectly complements our in-house IT team to create a flawless transition onto enabling Teams as a phone solution. And on the IT side today, we have James Dell, who's our lead technical architect and is a Microsoft certified professional. His key responsibility is finding our customers the right solutions to their problems from across the technology stack and to match all sizes of budget, and comes with a wealth of experience across the IT landscape. So that's me on the introduction. So over to you, James and Farah, who are going to run a live demonstration of the solution. Over to you guys.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for the introduction, Adrian, and good afternoon, everybody. So what we're going to do first of all is briefly go through the icons that you would expect to see on Teams initially if you are a Teams user currently. We're going to go through them as well for the benefit of those of you on the webinar that maybe aren't Teams users but have heard a lot about putting voice behind Teams and are maybe curious about this particular solution. So if we start in the top left-hand corner, James, and please work down. So top left is the activity option, which gives you an indication of everything that's happened within your Teams for you as a user. So any calls, any voicemails, any chat potentially that has happened in your Teams. You've also, one down, got the chat option, which will show chats that you've had. So you can see James and I were just catching up this afternoon briefly before the webinar. The next option down are teams within your organisation. So we have a specific Planet IT team and a voice group team. There's the calendar icon, and this will sync with anything that's in your Outlook calendar. So the nice thing about this is one pane to show you all the information that's happening within Teams. The option directly beneath that is your calls icon, and that will show you any calls that you've made or received on Teams, but also you've got your speed dial pane that comes into the middle of your screen there as well. Directly beneath the receiver option there, you've got a file option. So if you've shared any documents or anything within a Teams chat, those files will be held within Teams as well, and you can access them very quickly there. Now that's what you see generally within Teams if you're just using it for videos, chat and general UC communication within your organisation. Once we put direct routing or voice behind Teams, you will see a dial pad that will appear in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and this essentially allows you to make or receive calls on Teams as if it was a telephone system. James is just demonstrating making a call there. Lovely. Perfect. Thank you, James. What we're going to do now is, aside from those icons we've just covered, we're going to have a look at the options that are directly beneath the title that says calls at the top. So the first option you have is speed dial. James clicks on speed dial. You'll also see it's on speed dial currently, and it will show you any of the speed dials that you've populated this with as a user. So these can be internal contacts, external contacts, or a combination of the two. You simply click on add speed dial and complete the speed dial with the name, telephone number, and the company as you want it to appear. Perfect. Thank you very much, James. You will also notice that we'll give you an indication of presence as well. So you will see that it shows me as being away currently, and it will show you whether people are available to take a call, whether they're on do not disturb, or whether they are busy. Going to the next icon, we've got a new group icon. So this is really invaluable. So rather than just having individuals within your organisation, it may be that you have teams of staff, sales, marketing, accounts, for example. Now, if I'm dealing with a high portion of calls coming into my organisation and I'm trying to transfer a call through to the sales team and I'm trying people individually, it can be quite cumbersome and I have to keep calling the call back. So if you set up a group of users on their sales group, for example, what it will do is allow you to transfer that call through to a group of people within your organisation so the call is answered more quickly. Now, we will show you a bit later on during this demonstration the different types of groups and where you can create them, and also the different types of rings you can have. So essentially hunt groups like you would have on a telephone system. Next, we're going to have a look at parked calls. So this just gives you the ability to park a call on a telephone system or on this Teams solution. So you may be used to just placing a call on hold, and we will demonstrate all of these with some live calls shortly. If you place a call on hold, you're essentially responsible for that caller, whereas if you park a call, it allows you to place a call in a parking bay on Teams, and a member of the same department or organisation can intercept that call from another destination. Perfect. Thank you. Again, you've got a contacts option just down from speed dials there. Now, these are contacts that James has actually added, but also if you have any existing numbers within your Outlook contacts, these are also populated. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, James.
Yeah, so the only thing to add really on that is that if you're a 365 user, any addresses that are inside your telephone numbers, users that are inside your Exchange online address book will also sync into this. So as an organization, you can define a list of numbers as you would a list of email addresses in your address book, and this will pre-populate Teams, and it will also then help you with the caller line identity that comes through later on. So it means that you actually can really get the numbers to your users and identify them in a clean way, especially if you provide your staff with mobile phones, or if you have other offices that you maybe need to flag the numbers differently. You can do that, and you can take central control of it as an IT admin, and it's not something that a user has to do on a one-to-one basis, but a user can sort of do that manually, as I have done here. You can see I've added some numbers in to illustrate how you can make contacts and match them up to the numbers.
Perfect. So as James mentioned there, if someone is calling in from a mobile number or an external telephone number and they're already within your contracts or within 365, what it would do is it will what we call alpha tag. So it will display the name of the person calling in, so you can actually tailor the way you answer a call, whether you answer it as "Hi James" or whether you answer it as "Planet IT, good afternoon." Directly down from contacts, you'll see history, and this shows you collaboratively everything that's happened within your teams as a user. So you can see calls have come. James spends quite a lot of time calling himself, it would appear here, but you can see that I've also made a couple of calls. Generally, you would see higher volumes of calls, you'd see chats, you'd see meetings, potentially any activity you've had on Teams.
Yeah, so this is a unified approach. So because it's a UC platform, Teams, obviously, you'll probably find you have the history button at the moment, and it will show you meetings, it will show you voice calls and chats that you've had with internal staff over Teams. All that happens when you add the voice features to it is that information gets stacked in there as well. So it's not like you've got multiple interfaces to look at, it's a single pane of glass to give you all that information back.
So really useful, particularly if you've missed a call from somebody or somebody says they have called you and you haven't received a voicemail, you do have that list that you can scroll down to should you require. And directly beneath history, there's a voicemail option. Ironically, it has got a picture of a cassette tape by the side of it, was a little bit old school there, but it will show you any voicemail messages that you've received as an individual, and it will also show you the duration, the date and time, and the name or telephone number that has called you. So James is just going to play that there, so you can see it will play it to you. You can pause it, etc., should you need to, and it also translates it to text for you. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, James.
Yeah, I was going to say, as some of you may have noticed from my regional accent on this webinar already, that sometimes Teams isn't the best at translating those transcripts across. So you will find that sometimes the voicemail will show just you've received a message, and that's due normally to bad call quality, where Teams isn't able to clearly work out what's being said. So if it can't make a good transcript, something that it knows looks and feels correct in terms of the way that humans speak, it will then just say, sorry, you've had a voicemail, it's not clear enough for us to transcribe. Whereas if there is something, as we've shown, it will transcribe it into a clear message text for you, which is really useful. And I find it really useful when we're dealing with cool voicemails that are 2 or 3 minutes long and they don't give you the number till the very end. And then by the time at that point, you're like, I've got to restart the message again. With this, you can just go, okay, they've said it, the number's been transcribed out for me. So definitely makes a big difference.
And also, if you're on a call which is very, very information heavy or very technically heavy, you can refer back to it that way if you're trying to make notes through it as well. So that is quite useful. Perfect. Lovely. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make some calls in and then show you transferring calls and receiving calls and some of the options that are available to you that will become apparent once a call comes in. So in the bottom right hand corner, you can see that James is calling in. On the top bar, you can see that's a call for the main telephone number rather than James as an individual. And you can see because James's number is within the contact section, it shows you the telephone number and the name of James. Okay. We've now answered that call. Perfect. So you'll now see that different options become available on the taskbar at the top. If you click on the dial pad, James has the option to type in a telephone number, either internal or external, to transfer that call through to. Lovely. You've also got the show participants option, which allows you to see. So you can see at the moment you've got James on a call, you've got a call coming in, and James can add me to the call should he want to.
I can also dial an external number at that point in this window if I wanted to also add an external number into that call.
And historically, that's been quite difficult to do on a traditional PBX because you'd have to either physically transfer a call or set up a conference call, of which usually you're limited to, depending on the PBX vendor, up to 3 or 5 parties, which is a combination of internal and external staff.
Yeah, another thing to say just quickly on that kind of adding and growing, something that's really useful when you're adding numbers on the fly is you're essentially making an ad hoc conference, and Microsoft knows in the background how to juggle that. So as far as mentioned about legacy PBXs, they had a hard fixed number, whereas this is more flexible and the users you can add, and it's tied to the limit of the number of lines you have coming in. So it does give you a lot more flexibility should you need to suddenly do an ad hoc call with 10 external parties. In an unplanned manner, it allows you to do that in a controlled way.
Perfect, thank you. If we now click on more actions, we have got the device settings option, which as it says, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It hits the settings for devices. You've got the hold option there. So if we place this call on hold, James, you can see the call's on hold. Now, on a lot of phone systems in the past, you have what we would call a comfort tone, which is a comforting bleep every couple of seconds to let the caller know they're still connected. On Teams, you get the default music, which is non-offensive, restful music. But you do have the ability to have information on hold, which is captive marketing about your organisation. So if you can resume the call, please, James. Lovely. And click back so we can see the rest of the options. You have an option there to do a transfer. If we look at that, now this is what we would call a blind transfer. So you can type in the name or the telephone number to transfer the call through to and click on transfer and the call will be transferred through. If James clicks on the drop down directly by the side of it, there is an option to transfer a call directly through to somebody's voicemail. So we've all had situations where it's not convenient for you to take a call at that time. And what you don't want to do is wait for your phone to ring 4 rings and then drop to the voicemail. This does a direct to voicemail transfer for you, but it's also really useful in other situations. So if you receive a high number of sales calls, say recruitment, etc., or any type of sales calls, and you've got somebody fielding those calls and trying to answer other calls coming in, we can set up virtual mailboxes for you, which you can just simply transfer the calls straight through to. And those information can hold captive information. So things like, thank you for calling Planet IT. At the current time, we have no interest in your product, your company, or your services. Thank you for calling. Goodbye. It can then cut the caller off, but you have the option then as an administrator as whether you want to blacklist that caller or just arrange for them to always be transferred directly through into that mailbox. And I know, James, there's a couple of situations where you've used that type of service as well, haven't you, where you've set that up?
Yeah, definitely. So my background is education. So one of the things you often get in education is school trips, or used to, not currently as we are at the moment. But you'd often get parents ring in and say, can you tell me little Johnny's made it to France or not? So what we used to do is set up cool mailboxes where you'd say, right, okay, I need you to call in and drop into that mailbox and you'd hear a recorded message. And that's exactly what Teams allows you to do with these options, is you can say on the main call flow into the organisation, you can say press 2 for trip information. And then you can have pre-recorded messages about the trips that are going on, which means that nobody has to field those calls, and it frees the receptionist up to do their job rather than spending the entire day telling everyone that they've made it off the ferry successfully and there's no issues and they'll be home for tea, all those kind of things.
Perfect. It can also be used for things such as captive information about directions to your offices. So if you get a high number of calls where people are asking for directions and wanting you to stay on the call, you can transfer callers through to those so they can listen to that information over and over. There is also an option there for consult then transfer. So this is a courteous transfer. So it's the type of transfer where you announce it through to the intended recipient of the call, but you can also send through some additional chat for that. So you can say, this is the person calling with reference to the conversation you had last week about direct routing for Teams. They really like it and would like some pricing. And then you can get that information on the chat first. So that's quite a nice feature that you can also do on that as well. Lovely.
And then to transfer the call straight out of that chat window, literally the transfer button is there, but the same option exists, that transfer to voicemail option still exists in this way. So if I have a quick text conversation with Farah and she says, I'm sorry, I really don't have time to deal with this, I can drop it to the work voicemail and it still follows that same protocol of a few courteous rings to sound like it's being transferred, but then drops off to voicemail.
And during this time, the caller is listening to the restful music on hold or the information on hold if that's how your direct routing for Teams has been set up. Okay. If we go back to there, now we have got park a call. Now this is really useful. So we've demonstrated placing a call on hold, but if, for example, I have a call for James and I know he's deep in a build at this particular time, I can park a call for James and then advise him that there is a call waiting for him, and he can intercept it by typing in code 13 at a time that's convenient for him. One thing we do need to stress about parking calls, and there used to be a feature called parking and riding on Avaya systems for any of you that use Avaya, is that it's always courteous to let the person know there is a call waiting for them. So somebody has to take ownership and responsibility for that call, otherwise they'd be stuck in the ether.
And again, when that person's sat in the park, they can be listening to that same information on hold or just courteous music, depending on what your organisation prefers. But it's they don't feel like they just sat there listening to silence, which sometimes you get with some phone systems, and people often hang up then because they think they've been lost.
They do.
I've had it with insurance companies. It's always the, oh, have I been disconnected or not?
Definitely. That's where the term comfort tone comes from, James. There's also the option for turn on live captions. So I'll let James demonstrate this one for you. Now, this is something that will be fully available in Q3, so it's a bit of a work in progress at the moment. So actually, it doesn't tend to struggle that much with my accent, but sometimes with regional accents, the translations aren't so good. But James's lovely.
My understanding of the Queen's English maybe isn't correct, because webinar, web and R is probably not what I was trying to say. I suppose I'm going to talk about the roadmap for Teams a little bit later, but I think the important thing to stress on this is the function that they're trying to build into this platform is they're trying to make it an all singing, all dancing communications platform, adding things in that you can't get with traditional phone systems. So the idea of the transcript is that when this is fully functional and enrolled out to everybody and part of the system in Q3, that from all telephone calls, it can record a text output and put it into your chat history. So you don't need to go, oh, what was said in that call Tuesday with X? You can literally go back to the chat history and you'll see a typed out version of your conversation. Now, it means that the storage is less, so you don't need to store actual recordings if you've got no requirement for doing so. And it's also really easy because it can be searched. So during the search field in the top of Teams, you actually type in and say, I'm looking for something around Planet Webinar, and it will pull that chat history up where you talked about it. So it is quite powerful.
It's an amazing feature, I think, James. Perfect. Thank you. You can leave that call there. Lovely. I think we've covered off most of the things on here. One thing that I'd like to go through, James, is the exceptions on the do not disturb. So as we mentioned briefly earlier, you do have different options. So you can set your status if you want to. So if you're out of the office, if you're on annual leave or something like that, but you also have the ability to put yourself on do not disturb and then manage the priority access to you. On a PBX, all you used to do was put in a code or press DND, but that meant anyone who didn't have the authorization to contact you couldn't. So it's similar to this. So even if James is on do not disturb, he's added me as an exception and one of our engineers, so we still have the ability to contact him in the event of a do not disturb. So that means call, and it will notify of any chat as well. That's lovely. Brilliant.
The other thing that I want to highlight whilst we're in the settings menu really quickly is call queues, something that we'll talk about in a second when we go to the admin center. But for example, my user is a member of the IT call queue and the inbound call queue. So now if I know, for example, that I work in multiple departments or I have a member of staff that does, some days I'm covering the help desk, some days I'm maybe not, and I want to be able to drop in and out of those queues. Actually, inside Teams, you will have the ability to direct control where you receive calls from. As an administrator, you can turn this off, just saying that. There's a good caveat, but from an actual user point of view, this is really powerful. And in Skype for Business, if any of you have used Skype for Business on premise as a phone system, you didn't have that feature. It was a nightmare if you wanted to get users out of a group. You had to provide an administrator the rights to go and make changes to the settings and pull people out of queues. But now I can literally just toggle off a switch, and I'm not going to get calls from that queue now. So it means as an agent, I drop out of that queue, which is really powerful.
So that's the same as an in and out of group key that people used to use in call centres and things like that as well. You've also got different ringtones there, James, haven't you? So you can change the ringtone depending on the type of call. So if it's a forwarded call from a colleague, it can be a different call ringtone. If it's a delegated call, again, you can choose a different ringtone, which means you can customise the way that you answer a call. So you're not necessarily answering an external call the same way as you answer an internal call. You've also got the ability, so you've got a caller ID option there. Now this is also controlled by the administrator, but you can withhold your CLI, which is your calling line identity, which is commonly used in situations. So generally with credit control might withhold their calling line identity if they're chasing money, for example, but you have the ability, that flexibility as well within there. Lovely, thank you.
Perfect.
I think we've pretty much, sorry James, I think we've pretty much covered most of the demo. What we wanted to show is that Teams is intuitive, it's flexible, it's very easy to use, and from a user perspective, if you are putting voice behind it, if people are already using Teams, you don't have that reticence to learn new technology. I think that's really important when you do roll out a new telephony platform. I know that training in the past has always been quite cumbersome for some organisations, and so some people will naturally be a little bit nervous about using it.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose from my point of view, what I want to talk about from a more of a techie point of view, so I'm not going to go massively in depth with the technology. Don't worry, we're not going to bore some of the people on this on the call. What I did want to say though is, from an administration point of view, this is an IT system. It's not a phone system. So you manage it the same way you'd manage Office 365. It's web-based management. It's intuitive, and it's designed in a way to make the ease of use a lot higher than potentially some of your traditional phone systems. I know, coming from working with Cisco's and ShoreTels in the past, that actually Teams is a lot easier to manage. And if you're coming from Skype for Business on premise, this is a world better than it was managing it on premise with PowerShell and trying to make changes. Now, that said, the initial onboarding piece to get you from not having Teams as a phone system to having Teams as a phone system is technical. It is PowerShell and it is very hands-on, but that's why as part of IT, as part of the service, we handle that piece for you. But once you're in the platform and you're all set up, actually going through and managing things like users' numbers and what numbers are assigned to them, managing what kind of call flows you have, voice routing policies, all of that is done inside a web interface. There's no need to know anything special, no need to know any special commands. It is quite intuitive, and I think certainly from my point of view, you can't really rival that when you look at some of the other products that are out there. So, setting up an auto attendant, it's a driven process with very clear prompts from Microsoft. And one of the things that from my background was always a problem was adjusting holiday periods. As I said, I worked in education. School term times change all the time, inset days, things like that. It wasn't a fixed calendar. What's really nice about Microsoft Teams is the fact that adding in holiday exceptions is as simple as pressing an add button and choosing the date you want to add to that particular flow. It's not anything massively complicated. There's no, I need to know that it's a certain command, I need to know a certain way to do it, or I have to do it for each client. It's really simple to do. It's also the same when it comes to things like call flows. If you need to change your in-out messages, you want to change audio files to say, what does it sound like when people call in? Do we need to put a different message on? We've been bought out and we need to change the message on the call in. It's as simple as uploading a WAV file or an MP3. There's no special recording mechanism, having to pick up a phone and get someone to do it live and hope it sounds okay, send it to the recorder. And it's the same with setting menu options. It's really simple to essentially add and remove keys. It's as simple as choosing a number and choosing what it does. It's massively simple. The only thing I also wanted to say on the interface and the management side of things is Microsoft have done a great job as well of embedding some cool quality features into the product and some dashboards. Now, with a lot of other products, you have to pay for this stuff. With Microsoft, it's a included part of the platform. Now, take the data in this with a pinch of salt, because obviously this is a dev environment, and most of the time when I'm making calls to this, I've got my microphone muted, so it thinks the call quality is appalling because it can't hear anyone. But this data is all built into the dashboard. Now, from an IT point of view, that's really powerful because it allows you to find where the trends are, where the problems are. So if someone as a user says, I always get really poor call quality, you can identify down to the user, down to the call, what was causing that issue, whether it was headset, whether it was the endpoint, whether it was their internet connection, or whether it was a Microsoft server problem, or whether it was a problem with the actual telephone line going to the other user. It's very good in detecting what that is and being honest with you. And it will tell you, Microsoft's quite good at telling you when they've made mistakes. They're good at putting their hands up, and they're very good at telling you when it's a client problem, or likewise saying actually the call between your end user and our servers was perfect, but actually the call at the very end out of our system to whatever the other endpoint was actually where the call quality issue was. And all of these reports, there's loads of them built into this. So there's client version reports, so you can see which versions of which clients people are using. All of this data is essentially naturally built into the platform. You haven't got to do anything, and you can manipulate it. And if you're a Power BI wizard and you really want to get into manipulating this data, you can pull this data out to Power BI as well and have as much fun as you want with it, or as little as fun as you think is necessary. But yeah, from a management point of view, I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I think this is quite an intuitive product to get your hands on and manage.
Sorry, you're getting quite enthusiastic about that, James.
One
thing that I will certainly say is if there anyone's on this call who currently is looking after a legacy on-premise PBX that may be connected to traditional lines such as ISDN or ISDN2 or ISDN30, you will know that making changes to an automated attendant or making changes to day, night or lunchtime mode is not straightforward and not as intuitive. I know that a lot of systems are limited to either 4 or 6 different ring plans or modes of operation, and in many cases your incumbent maintainer may actually not allow you access to that area of the telephone system or the voicemail system, so it will basically involve somebody either attending site or a chargeable visit. So certainly from a PBX perspective, I think this is very, very simplified, and I think it's going to appeal to a lot of people because it does empower them to actually maintain and make the programming changes themselves, which means the changes can be made as and when they need to, as you demonstrated there, James.
Perfect. I think we'll go back to the slides now, and then we've got some bits just to talk about. I think we've finished with our live demonstration, so I'll just let this transition happen.
Okay, lovely. So what we're going to cover now is why direct routing for Teams is perfect for your organization. So it's a fast deployment. In fact, the longest lead time we have with reference to this deployment is potentially the number porting process. It's intuitive. So you've seen as we've worked through this, if you're already using Teams, it's quite straightforward. You know what it does. But if you right click or if you click on the drop down or hover on something, it will give you all the information you need. So it's very nice for people who haven't used it before. And there's always that element of familiarity as well. So if people are already using it for chat, for video calls, etc., and there are so many people now since COVID who may not have used Teams. I mean, before I joined Planet IT a couple of years ago, I hadn't used Teams at all. Now I'd say 95% of my day is spent on Teams. So familiarity is certainly something that I think will tick a box for people.
Only 95%. Would you say only 95% of your day is used on Teams? I would say 120%. But no, it's definitely, if it's not familiar, it certainly should be by now.
It should be, definitely, yeah. So ease of use as well, as we've covered off. Thank you. It does exactly what you need. So if you need to be able to make calls, receive calls, if you want people to be able to press 1 for sales, 2 for accounts, 3 for marketing, etc., it has the ability to do that. You can transfer calls directly to voicemail. You can have different hunt groups. You can log in and out of hunt groups. All the things that you would want to do on a telephone system, it does that. And ironically, I was discussing this yesterday with James about when I used to deploy large Samsung systems that had over 500 features. Even though it had all of those amazing, weird and wonderful features, it was a bit like a washing machine and people only ever needed to use 2 or 3 of them. So it does exactly what you need. Furthermore, Planet IT will give you free local, national and UK mobile calls on a 36-month contract. And it's all done at a very competitive price. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the pricing model shortly. So is it expensive? So if we have a look at the Planet IT direct routing for Teams proposition, you will see that a voice license is £7.50 plus VAT per seat per month. And the direct routing license, which is essentially the voice behind it, is £3.50 plus VAT per seat per month. And we give unlimited free local, national and free UK mobile calls. And the cost for a 30 user example, as you can see there on the Planet proposition, is £330 per month plus VAT. James, over to you on the Microsoft part.
Yeah, because Microsoft's never quite as simple. So obviously Microsoft starts off by saying it's £12 per seat per month. So that is their voice license plus what they call their PSTN gateway license, but it's bundled into a single license now, £12 plus VAT. They then do call plans are required for each user. So the example we've got here is using the domestic call plan, which essentially matches what Farah's mentioned on the left. So it's national and local calls and mobiles. Now, these are 120-minute call bundles, and they are assigned per user per month, and they're £4.52. Now, the thing to mention about that is that if I make 200 minutes worth of calls, I have to buy for my user 2 of those call bundles. I cannot pool and borrow from other users. My calls, my minutes are assigned to me and me only. This obviously directly contrasts the approach that we take, and obviously can become quite expensive quite quickly, because if you've got a user that is overusing the minutes that you allocate to them, but you've got users that are underusing, you're always going to be buying more bundles. But the overall price on a 30 user example, based on the users only using 120 minutes, is £495.60 plus VAT. So you can see already there's a saving there by splitting up the Microsoft offering. And that's obviously why in the past people have been a bit hesitant about going directly with Microsoft because of the cost model. Something else I'd like to add as well is obviously the voice license piece of our offering, which is £7.50 per month. If you're in a non-for-profit organisation or in education and you're applicable for the Microsoft discount scheme, you can get that at a lower rate. So obviously that's a conversation to have with your Planet account manager one-on-one, but there's definitely not saying that there's not some money to be saved there for those organisations who get those kind of discounts from Microsoft.
I'd also like to add, James, in comparison to the Microsoft option, it's 2,000 free UK mobile calls, 2,000 minutes, sorry, for free UK mobile calls on the Planet IT option. So whereas very quickly someone like me, for example, would run out of the 120 minutes, I don't know, maybe I'd run out of the 2,000 minutes as well. But again, it's a very attractive proposition. Also, porting and labour charges apply, the setup, and the porting or taking of your numbers from whatever type of service you're using at the moment, whether it's traditional lines, and moving them into the cloud, charges will apply for that. But we will go through that process with you and be very transparent about the costs associated with it. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So we've talked about the amazing things that Teams, Direct Routing for Teams does do for you, but it wouldn't be fully transparent if we didn't tell you what it doesn't do out of the box. So it doesn't do fully dedicated, fully encrypted call recording that would stand up in a court of law that's MiFID compliant. So it doesn't do that out of the box, but we do have the ability, and we do have partnerships with organisations who are Microsoft certified that provide that particular solution for you. If you're a call centre, it will do an element of allowing you to log in and out of groups. It will give you basic analytics. But if you want dedicated or skills-based routing and more detailed analytics, which is also another option on here, it won't do that for you. But again, there is an integration that we can provide that will allow that solution for you. It doesn't give you a multi-tiered IVR or automated attendance. So if you've called a large organisation, for example, and you hit the first message, so thank you for calling Planet IT, press 1 for sales, 2 for accounts, 3 for marketing, and then you press 1 for sales. When you go through to sales, it will allow you to do another level of key presses. So for account management, press 1, for sales, press 2, but it won't allow you to go past that. So if you want a very detailed multi-tiered IVR, it won't do that for you. But it does the very basics of it. But a single or dual layer IVR is usually more than adequate for an organisation. Detailed analytics, James showed you briefly what it can do, so the different types of statistics you can have. If you need really detailed analytics, like missed calls, received calls, find CLI, have emailed reports to you in a doctor's surgery or a call centre scenario, again, we can do that with a third-party partner add-on. And if you want enhanced PBX features, so things like whisper page or off-hook voice announce or any of those weird and wonderful features you may be using currently on an on-prem PBX, we can have a conversation with you about that. So if you want any of those things and a third party won't work, even when we've been through that route with you, all's not lost, because we do have some other solutions. So we are pleased to advise that we're also a Wildix Gold partner. and we're a Ring Central partner as well, of which both of those organisations and those partnerships allow us to work with those. Now, James is just going to go through the Microsoft Teams release roadmap to show you what's ahead on Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, I suppose the reason I kind of had this slide added was I wanted to show to you that it's not a done product. It's not something that's going to stop moving forward. If you've used Teams over the last 12 months whilst we've been in various stages of lockdown, you'll notice that Teams changes on a weekly basis, and Microsoft are not stopping that. There's about 700 features on the next 3 years roadmap. Some of those won't happen, some of them will, some of them will drop earlier than they are intended to. But this is just to show you over the next couple of months what's happening. So the first thing, which is really important to what we're talking about today around having call queues and groups of people answering the same phone number, is shifts. So this is rolling out to clients at the moment, and what this allows you to do is tag users by their working hours, their shifts. So if you have a 24/7 organization, you need 6 users to answer the phone during the first 4 hours of the day and another 6 later in the day, you can actually set their working hours and the phone system will automatically take them off of the queue as their shift ends. Really useful, nice feature there. So what we do have coming out literally in the next couple of days is on-demand live transcription inside both the Android app and then later in March inside the iOS app. At the moment, it's only on desktop. In terms of call merging, you probably all use this if you've got an iPhone or an Android mobile phone. If you've got 2 calls coming in, you actually want to talk to each other. The call merge option doesn't exist at the moment in Teams, but that literally is just about to drop into everyone's application if you are voice enabled from later in this week. I think it's actually going to drop on the 1st of March, even though it says February. And they've also upped the scale of meetings and of the single tenancy use of Teams. So you've now got a 10,000 user single existence limit, which is more than enough for most organizations, and certainly will make calls quite interesting with 10,000 people on them. Now, in March 2021, we've also got collaborative calling and then the one-to-one PSTN features, which actually, the reason I've highlighted that is because there's so many features under that one banner. But what it really means is that enhanced PBX piece that Farah's talking about, we're starting to get closer to that. So there's not many features that most people use in phone systems that Teams doesn't do, but the bits it doesn't do, they're trying to catch up with really quickly. And they're being very selective and looking at the features that people really use on their traditional PBX systems and going, right, actually, what am I going to put into this product? So it has got quite a in-depth roadmap. And if you wanted to have a conversation after this about all the things on the roadmap, I'm more than happy to do that. But it's certainly still developing and it will continue to do so.
So now we're going to go through what other things you should consider with regards to direct routing for Teams. So you should consider your existing connectivity, whether you have good broadband or Ethernet example, to run this solution. Another one is who owns your telephone numbers. Before you can migrate or port your telephone numbers onto a hosted solution, it's all about ownership of numbers. So whoever bills you currently potentially owns your numbers, so you would need to check that particular point before investigating this. Also, if you're in contract, because if you try and port a telephone number and you're in an existing contract with your incumbent provider, cease or termination charges will apply and they can be costly. And one thing we'd like to highlight to everyone is that there will be short downtime during a number port whilst the number is being ported into the IP cloud. And then really the next question is, does direct routing for Teams, best suit your business? If it doesn't, I was slightly premature mentioning this earlier on in the presentation, but we have accreditations we're a Wildix Gold partner and a Ring Central partner. So both of these solutions also integrate with Teams, or we can have different discussions with you and really go through what the best solution is based on what your requirements are as an organisation. So it's all really about finding the best fit for you. And there you've got mine and James' contact telephone numbers. Should you have any questions or to arrange an alternative demonstration bespoke to your organisation.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the Q&As that have been passed through the live Q&A feature. If you do have questions, feel free to add them into that system. Any that we don't answer directly in the next sort of block of time whilst we're going through these, we will answer every question that's put in there, and we will send those responses out with the follow-up email that will come out after this event. So I'm going to start with the question that I've seen, which actually we should have mentioned, and I apologise that we haven't, around Teams features across platforms. So if you're on Windows or if you're on Mac OS, on the full desktop application, you have complete feature parity for the phone system. There's no differences at all. Microsoft have tried really hard over the last 12 months to try and remove that gap where Mac OS was about 6 months behind in features with the Windows client. So now they actually release near enough on the same day. So yeah, if you're a exclusive Mac OS house, or if you're exclusive Windows, or you're a mix of both, you'll have no problems at all. It's the same with the Android and iOS applications. They still do support the phone system completely. There's no real limitation in the features at the moment. What generally happens though is when new features come out, for example, the call merging, they will come out on the desktop application first, and then will follow through on the mobile a few weeks later. So I'll just saw another. All the questions are moving so quickly. I've lost where I was looking.
Right, so no, I know. There's so many questions coming in, James. Yeah, I can see there's one here about hunt groups on Teams. Yes, you can. So the same as you can do on a normal PBX system, it's all about timers, overflows, etc. So we can set up the timers and the overflows for you if they don't answer within a specific set amount of time, and then it will automatically overflow to the next destination you've specified, whether that's a group of users or whether that destination is to voicemail or to go off to another destination. So yeah, that's absolutely possible there.
I saw another question around voicemail. So the voicemail does appear inside the application as we showed, but yes, you do also receive an email to say you have a voicemail, and that email does have the WAV file version of the conversation attached, which you can forward on. So should you need to send that to another user, you can. Obviously, if that user is also in the same team as you, they will have a copy of that voicemail in their voicemail box as well. So there's less need to do that, and Microsoft are trying to get away from that having large attachments in emails, but certainly it's something you can do.
There's a message here, James, actually saying if it's a withheld number or a hidden number, is there an automatic feature to say that we're not going to answer a call from them? I guess that's based on the no CLI coming in. We have the ability to route that through to a message such as a virtual mailbox, which we mentioned earlier. Yeah,
we wouldn't do a hard drop on that, but yes, we could route anything that's got a hidden or an unknown number through to a dedicated drop box, essentially, to get rid of it. We wouldn't want to hard drop those numbers just in case, but we certainly could divert them off to a location that someone could check at a later date. There's another question on here, sorry, around handsets. I think we haven't mentioned, obviously, because it's Teams and we're all using headsets and living in a world where we're all living off our laptops. Microsoft Teams does support physical handsets, so you can get the kind of plasticky phones. I say plastic, it's a really rude way to describe it. But, being an IT person, I don't have plastic phones in front of me, but yeah, so you can get those. There's a range of suppliers that do those, and also if you have Teams rooms, or if you've looked at Microsoft Teams rooms, there is integration with that platform for direct telephone numbers in and out of those Teams rooms, so you actually can expand this beyond just a standard on the desk phone to conferencing phones and to anything else you need. So this will replace a traditional phone system. If you have phones in your reception, for example, that allows someone to call a taxi directly, all those kind of single-use phones, you can still do all that in Teams. It's just all a piece of configuration.
So I noticed as well, someone's asked if you can existing direct dial numbers be moved over onto Teams. It absolutely can. So we would move those onto the Planet IT ownership, and then port those directly or migrate those onto the direct routing for Teams platform. So absolutely, we can move existing DDIs onto that.
There's another question here around hunt groups. So essentially the way that Microsoft does hunt groups inside Teams is what they call queues. So what you can have at the end of a queue is a set of actions. So the action is either the call is not answered, transfer it to a voicemail box, the call is not answered, drop it, or the call is not answered, transfer it to another queue or a virtual operator. So what that means is if it goes to a virtual operator, it'll ask someone it will say the name of the person you're trying to reach, and it will try to redirect directly. And if you pump it to another queue, it will then just start ringing that queue. So you can essentially have the ability to pass calls off and keep moving them around until someone's found. And there's also a lot of different ways you can configure those ringing methods. So you can actually have a ring where it rings the last idle, or it rings the person whose presence is set to available, or it just rings everyone and ignores presence. There's a lot of flexibility flexibility there in the way that we set queues up. But the fact that you have the presence built into the Microsoft system means that you actually do have the ability to be more intelligent with the way that you route calls and not have it ringing on someone's desktop who is, maybe set to away, they're not near their machine, it's just ringing and ringing and ringing. But actually it's pointless doing that. And if there's nobody in that queue who's available, then that naturally should either drop out to another queue or go to voicemail, and we can set that inside Teams because we have that intelligence, which you don't get with a traditional phone system because it doesn't know if you're sat at your desk, it doesn't know if you're using it, so essentially it will just continue to ring forever.
Yeah, so I think on traditional systems, what they would tend to do is it would try to attempt to deliver that call for so many times and then auto log out the agent, whereas this is way more intuitive, as you said, James. So it's based on presence, so it tends to work a lot easier. I can see that someone's also asked, are there any additional costs? So call recording is something we would have to go through with you specifically to see how many users you want, how you want that to work, whether you want it just to be audio, whether you want it to actually record screen sharing, meetings and chat. So any specific questions around things like that where additional costs will apply, if we can take that offline, or if you could reach out to either me, James, or your account manager, we will go through that for you because each one of those is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Sorry. Oh, no, you go, James, sorry.
I was going to say there's a question around call transfers to a different 365 tenant. So you can, if they've got a telephone number you can route it to, with the way that transferring calls works, your user has to be voice enabled to transfer that call across them. So if I have a call coming into me and I try and transfer it to someone who doesn't have a voice license or a telephone number assigned, Microsoft will deny that call. They can be added to the call to be a third party agent because essentially I'm holding the telephone call at that point and they're coming in to add their voice to it, but we can't push the call off to them. Anyone that wants to receive a call needs to have a voice license. So if you're transferring to another 365 tenant, they would also need to be voice enabled. Otherwise the call won't be able to pass across. But it is a good way to get around international call rates because if you've got a Teams call and your team is spread across the globe, calls between Teams to Teams clients obviously aren't chargeable because it goes over the Teams protocol. And if the calls come into a UK operator and they add in someone from the US or someone from Australia, then there's no charge for that connection because the connection is handled by Teams in the background, and actually the voice call is still only connecting at a local rate number. So there's some advantages there around how you handle calls.
I can also see there's a question around offices in different countries, whether they can all be covered on the same system, which you've kind of covered a little bit of that, James, but you can also have, they've also asked if you can have different telephone numbers for different office locations. You absolutely can. You can choose the geographic location telephone numbers you want brought onto Teams and have them in addition to numbers that you have in existence already.
There's a question around the, sorry.
No, you go, James. Sorry.
So there's just a question around the Teams mobile app experience. That is completely for voice calling. It works as you'd expect. It works really well. You get the phone call will show up on your phone like a normal call coming through on Teams, but obviously it will say it's a telephone number. You can answer it and interact in the same way. You can transfer. You can do all the same features. Obviously the interface is slightly different, but it's the experience is really good, providing that you've got good Wi-Fi or good 4G signal or 5G signal. Now you'll be more comfortable taking Teams calls on your mobile from external telephone numbers.
I can also see that someone's asked for the rates for international calls for landlines and mobiles. We do have a SIP international tariff. More than happy to send that through to you.
There's another question around minimum requirements of broadband speeds. So the minimum requirement for Microsoft Teams officially is 2.5 megabits per second. That is the same regardless of whether you're doing voice calling or whether you're doing video calling. They don't change that requirement. Now, obviously, the bigger issue is more about the stability of your broadband, less about the speed, because voice calling can go over quite a small amount of bandwidth. But what generally happens is if there's interruptions or the Wi-Fi signal gets wobbled, someone walks in between you and the router and it dips out, the audio will do that funny dipping effect, which we've all heard. So it's very much a case of in most rural areas it works fine. I'm going to say that I've not got the best broadband in the world, and I don't think that Farah has either, because we live in places typically that are against our jobs and want to give us really poor broadband.
Ironically.
Yeah, but we still seem to handle this pretty well. And also I've been using this demo environment for 2 weeks solidly for doing lots of aggressive testing and being quite heavy whilst doing my full workload, and it's not had any problems with my broadband, so I think you should be fine.
I can see as well, I'd like to add as well onto that, James, that if you do have members of staff who are in weird and wonderful locations, we can provide business grade services, whereas if some people are working on a consumer based product, they could be contention ratios of 100 to 1, 200 to 1. We can offer business grade services as well, or Ethernet, or even 4G data only services to facilitate that kind of stable circuit if you are doing a lot of calls.
And last couple of questions, the one I'm just going to pick up on here is around CRM integration or ERP integration. So Teams can plug into some third-party applications to do click to dial and features like that. It really depends on what your systems are. If it's Microsoft Dynamics, 100% it will work. Products outside of that, it's a case of a case-by-case basis. But if there's not a natural integration, there's often an API integration with Teams that you can get. So that's very much on a case-by-case basis, but we can help with that. There's no issues at all on that one. And the last one that I was just going to pick up on was around reception consoles. As we sort of mentioned with the integration piece, there's lots of Microsoft approved plugins that will go on top of Teams to give you those features that maybe feel closer to your traditional phone systems. And it's a case of looking at what your current reception console is used for and finding the right one for you. Certainly it's the same when you look at call center features. There's about 6 approved Microsoft call center features, and it's just making sure that you pick the ones that are right for you.
Yeah, and also as part of this process, which we haven't really covered off because we've covered off quite a lot of time, we're getting so many questions coming in as we go through this, is that we actually work with you and do what we call a data collection, which is when we sit and go through with you all of the features that we think will suit your specific requirements, and then ask and go through how you want it set up, and that's a collaborative process. We liaise heavily with you. You have a lot of input into it as well. So things like that, we can talk about the different options that you would want to use, what's important to the key person in your organisation that's fielding volumes of calls coming in, and then we'll kind of handhold you through that entire process. So it's very much a partnership, which is where James and I come in. So you've got the IT side and the voice side coming together collaboratively to make sure this is delivered in the most appropriate manner for your organisation.
I've just found a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of merge into one really quickly just to kind of wrap this up. It's around data residency, so where the data is stored, around compliance around transcribed calls and things like that. So the first point is that data residency, just like your 365 environment, can be defined. So it either can be in the UK exclusively, or in the EU, or in any other country you choose for your tenant to exist within. That's done when you initially set your tenant up. So therefore, any data that's recorded as part of the Teams environment sits inside that residency. There's no compliance issues around the transcribed calls because we're not keeping the voice of anyone. There's no restriction around keeping the transcription of calls, but obviously there is restrictions around keeping audio recordings, which is why Microsoft don't do it. There's no notification that goes to the end user to say the call's being transcribed, but obviously if you were using a call recording feature, it would notify a user that you're recording the call at that point. If you do need compliant, as far as said, call recording, that's when the third-party plugins come in, and they're driven, again, you can choose where the data's housed, but they're driven around that compliance model, which obviously is more about making sure they're legally compliant and less making sure that they're compliant with the standard kind of GDPR rules. It's much bigger than that. But I think that kind of covers a few of those questions off, just to kind of wrap that up nicely.
Sorry, I can just see one more question that I'd like to cover off quickly, James, because I think this may be a pressing thing for some people based on costs, etc. Well, you can absolutely block the types of calls that your users can make. So on a phone system, we call it class of service. So if you want to stop someone making premium rate calls, international calls and things like that, we have the ability to bespoke what people can use on the system, who they can call, etc.
I'm going to quickly interject because I know you're both chomping at the bit to keep answering questions, but that's really all the time that we've got for today. So thank you, Farah and James, for excellent demo of the Teams solution. Just to wrap it up and reiterate what James and Farah were saying earlier, if you have, I'm sure you've probably got lots more questions, please feel free to reach out directly to both Farah and James or your Planet IT account manager. I would be more than happy to either set up a more tailored demo to yourselves, or anything else that you may need around pricing, features, functionality, etc. Like we said, we're going to put together all of the answers to the questions and make sure that they go out to everybody, just so that you can confirm that. And I believe we've taken a recording of today's webinar as well, which we'll be posting out on all the socials. So thank you to everybody that's attended. We've had record attendance today. Just goes to show how popular this subject is. And like I said, if you need anything, please feel free to reach out. So thanks, James and Farah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Bye.